Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Capital G here, after a couple of chaotic weeks at home, shall we say. Bringing you an EDH deck tech for Brallin the Skyshark Raider and Shabraz the Skyshark. Actually, you know what? Brallin Skyshark Raider going solo. I'm up for a challenge today, so there's no actual reason to do this, but certainly fun. So let's look at Brallin Skyshark Rider and see what he's all about. Got ourselves a 3/3. Doesn't seem so impressive for 4 mana. But anytime you discard a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Brallin, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. The activated ability of target shark gains trample until end of turn. Don't worry about that. Don't have any sharks in the deck. Obviously, you would typically pair him with his partner Shabraz. Shabraz is a flyer that gets +1/+1 counters when you draw cards. So made for very, very nice synergy. But let's have a look at what you can do with just Brallin, shall we? Starting at the top with some artifacts. Obviously, because red can only draw X amount of cards on their own, let's double that up with Alhamid's Archive. The Anvil of Bogart, this one's a more expensive card, but this is a sweet, sweet add if you've got it. Sure, nobody has to discard cards in their hand anymore as a result of maximum hand size, so no more maximum hand size for anybody, but everybody gets to draw an additional card during their draw step and then chooses and discards a card. Bag of Holding, I thought this was a weird add when I was looking this up on EDH Rec, honestly. But it turns out that the first line here is a trigger. Whenever you discard a card, exile the card from your graveyard. I don't see the word instead anywhere. So you can have your Bag of Holding out, discard cards to the Bag of Holding, essentially. And it still triggers. Also the fact that it has a loot here, draw a card and discard a card. And also the fact that we can sacrifice and get all our cards back makes it a handy tool. Also a handy tool, Crucible of Worlds. Hopefully some of the cards we'll be discarding are lands, so we can replay our lands from our graveyard and save on resources that way. Everflowing Chalice, great rock, scales up depending on whatever stage of the game you are. You have 2 mana, kick it once. If you have 4 mana, kick it twice, so on and so forth. The more you kick it, the more mana this thing can produce for us. Fire Diamond, just taps for red, comes into play tapped. Inspiring Statuary. Always love this card. I think we're running just enough artifacts to justify its presence, but not too many so that we can't cast half our spells. It's a delicate balance. Non-artifact spells, of course, we'll have Improvise while this is out, which means we can tap artifacts as if they were a generic mana rock. It reduces the cost of the card. So I thought a great add here. Lightning Greaves, we do want to protect our commander, so Lightning Greaves. Memory Jar, classic card if you got it. Tap, sack, everybody exiles their hands, draws 7 cards, and then all those cards get discarded at the end of the turn. And our original hands will come back to our hands. So it's a way to draw back up, maybe play 1 or 2 cards and then discard the rest and deal some damage. Mind Stone, just a mana rock that we can cash in for a card later. Soul Ring, we don't have a lot of ramps, so play the Soul Ring. Swiftfoot Boots, also protect our commander. Wayfarer's Bauble, why not? Mitch would be proud. And of course the Worn Power Stone. Yes, it's a little slow, but at least it taps for our 2 mana. Over to creatures, there's a few interesting ones. And because we'll be discarding cards, there'll be a few interesting interactions with the graveyard as well. And even with the discard step, so. Anji's Ravager, of course, we can cast for only 2 mana if we end up discarding it, thanks to Madness. Or we can just cast it straight up for 3, it gives us a 3/3, and it gives us a way to discard our hand and draw some cards. Cavalier Flame from M20. Maybe prices on this one will be, on the Cavalier cycle, will start to drop a little bit next year. These cards will still be legal for another year, but hopefully we've got better options with M21 that the Cavaliers will come down in price, because these are all some sweet cards. In the case of the Cavalier, of course, giving the whole board +1/0 for a couple of mana. Pretty sweet. The ETB of discarding any number of cards from our hand and drawing that many cards, the fact that we can control how many cards we discard is pretty sweet. And then, of course, when it dies, it deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of land cards in our graveyard. I don't know if we'll have so many lands in our graveyard depending on our Crucible. But, again, very, very useful. And 6/5, that's significant on the battlefield. Dragon Mage. Basically a Wheel of Fortune on a stick. Yes, it's 7 mana for a 5/5 flyer, but every time the Dragon Mage connects, and you can go political and get your opponents to let you hit them with the Dragon Mage, because they might need some cards. Horn Buccaneer. This is a nice little way to add some redundancy to Brallin. It's a 2/4 with haste, but whenever you discard a card, he deals 1 damage to each opponent, just like Brallin. It also gives us a loot ability. Discard a card, draw a card, activate only if he's attacking. I don't know how often we want to attack with him, honestly, but he's definitely doubling up on the damage that Brallin would deal. Goblin Dark Dwellers. Of course, we're going to have some instants and sorceries in our graveyard, so why not have a way to recast them from the graveyard? Yes, it only casts instants and sorceries with mana cost 3 or less, but you'll see that we have some good choices. Hazoret's here. She can't attack unless we have, or block, unless we have 1 or fewer cards in hand, but she gives us a discard outlet, and that discard outlet actually deals a whole bunch of damage too. Magus of the Wheel, of course. A creature that we can pay 2, tap, and sack to discard our hands and draw some cards. That'll be for everybody, not just us, of course, but still very, very useful. Neheb the Eternal. This card has impressed me. I've only seen it maybe 3 or 4 times, but does work every time, both as a commander and in the 99. Beginning of your post-combat main phase, add a red to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So if you happen to have him and Brallin, and you pay 3 mana and wheel and deal, Wheel of Fortune, for example, and deal, let's say, 5 damage to your opponents, then on your second main phase, you have 50 mana to play with. It is amazing. Runehorn Hellkite. It's a 5/5 flyer for 6. Not what brings it to the dance, it's the fact that we can pay 6 mana and exile this from our graveyard to have a wheel effect. Sometimes we just need to have cards from our graveyard that we can bring back to our hand, and that's what Shard Phoenix can do. It's a 5 mana 2/2 flyer, not so great, but we can sacrifice and deal 2 damage to each creature without flying. So this could clear out a few small tokens if someone's going the Sapperling strategy. You can also pay triple red and return the Shard Phoenix from our graveyard to our hand. So again, a way to put a card into our hand that we can discard again. Squee has that effect for free. Squee Goblin Nabob. At the beginning of your upkeep, just return Squee Goblin Nabob from your graveyard to your hand. The Surly Badgesaur, coming in from the Ikoria Commander set. Now, this is essentially a Waste Not, but for red. It kind of reads that way to me. Whenever you discard a creature card, he gets +1/+1 counter. Whenever you discard a land, you get a treasure. That's pretty sweet, be able to turn that into mana. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So obviously, if you're discarding a bunch of cards at the same time, you stack the trigger so it can win some of those fights. Of course, Torbrand, Thrain of the Redfell. Reading Brallin is each time you discard a card, you deal 1 damage. So if you're discarding 5 cards, that's 5 sources of 1 damage. So Torbrand means, with Torbrand in play, that would be 5 sources of 3 damage now. And Wolf of Devil's Breach. Pretty sweet attacker, 5/5 mana, 5/5 for 5 mana. But whenever this attacks, you may pay a red and 1 and discard a card. If you do, deal damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost. So this gives us some spot removal as well. A few enchantments. Curse of Opulence is a great little ramp piece in red. Diverts attacks away from your direction and gets and nets everyone some treasures. Why not? Experimental Frenzy. Here's my thought on this one. We want to keep cards in our hand so we can discard them. So if we're playing cards off the top of our library, that means the number of cards in our hand accumulates. And if ever it's kind of backfiring, like we run into a stack of lands, whatever, you can just pay the 4 mana, destroy the Experimental Frenzy, and continue to play Magic as normal. So we're not stuck with it if we play it. Of course, M21 brings us Safari Emancipation. If a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage. So again, you have your Brallin out, you're discarding, say, 5 cards, you're dealing 15 to each opponent. Gratuitous Violence, same deal. It's 1 mana less expensive, but it still deals double damage. Tectonic Reformation, each land card in your hand has cycling red, so why not? Once you have enough, once you feel you've got enough mana, just cycle, deal some damage, and draw into the good stuff. And just a spice add here, the Flame of Keld. Obviously, because this works over 3 turns, a little tricky to navigate, but it's fun times. And it's 2 mana. It's 2 mana. Discard your hand. You got your Brallin out. Do your 4 or 5 damage, whatever it may be. Then you get to Chapter 2, draw 2 cards, and if you hit Chapter 3, whenever a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage plus 2. So this is a fantastic card if you manage to line up the chapters. Some instants, Bolt Bend is a good way to defend our commander. Our commander will likely have power 4 or greater, so this will cost us 1 red to defend him. Deflecting Swat, 0 mana to defend our commander. Somebody wants to target our commander, we've got a couple ways to redirect. Fiery Temper, a nice way to take advantage of the fact that we're discarding cards by bolting something, essentially. Fling, if somebody tries to take control of our commander, we'll just fling it at them. Chances are we're going to have a bunch of +1/+1 counters on him, so we might be flinging for 10, 12, 14, maybe even 20, depending on what stage of the game we're at. Classic Lightning Bolt, obviously a lot of people still debate if this is good or bad in Commander. A lot of people say it's a bad card, but you'd be surprised what this gets. Somebody drops an Ugin and wipes the board. Finish off that Ugin. Zulaport Cutthroat followed up by a Wrath. Bolt the Zulaport Cutthroat. So on and so forth. This card has a lot more utility than you realize, and it will be cast 100% of the time. But you draw it. Risk Factor is an interesting way to draw back up some cards. Obviously, standard All-Star for its time. 3 mana at an instant speed. You can have any opponent decide if they decide to take 4, and if they don't, you draw 3 cards. And the Jumpstart means you can discard a card and cast it a second time. So later in the game, you draw back up cards. Early in the game, you might deal some damage. Either way, sweet card. Temur Battle Rage. I've always loved this card. Nice little combat trick, especially when Brallin gets swole. Thrill of Possibility. Of course, we want to discard cards and draw cards, so Thrill of Possibility is here to do so at instant speed. We discard a card and draw 2. Lands are up next. We have Desert of the Fervent. Drownyard Temple is a nice little land that we can pay 3 and return from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, so if we manage to discard this one early, it's essentially a ramp spell for us. Forgotten Cave cycles for a red. Gaia Reach Sanitarium, a long-time favorite since the return to Innistrad sets. Each player draws a card, then discards a card. Always love this one. Running 30 Mountains. Running a Scavenger Grounds. Sack a Desert, exile all cards from all graveyards. Yes, we have some graveyard synergies with our deck, but we don't rely on them. Like, we're not going to be hurting just because our graveyards are exiled. Other decks may feel the pain a little more. Also to win a Shivan Gorge. The number of times I've seen a player come back and win the game from 1 life makes this a sneaky little utility add. And Valakut. We are running 30 Mountains, so why not run a Valakut and deal some damage that way as well. Running 4 Planeswalkers. A couple of Chandras. Let's start with Chandra Blaze. Gives us a discard outlet with the +1. You discarded the card, and if it's red, deal 4 damage to a creature or a player. I wonder, I'll have to... It is in fact 4 damage to any target. I was just checking the errata below. It is in fact 4 damage to any target, because this was printed before they changed the rules on a lot of the old red targeted damage spells, so there you go. The -2, each player discards their hand, then draws 3 cards. Good way to Yep, mass discard and keep some ammunition in our hands. Next up, it says cast any number of red instant or sorcery cards from our graveyard without paying their mana costs. We're not really building towards that, but we could get there. Chandra Flamecaller, also a 6 mana Chandra, but also has that middle ability of discarding all the cards in our hand. To draw that many cards +1, in this case it's a 0 ability, so we don't gain or lose loyalty with it. Her +1 is create a couple of 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste that are exiled at the beginning of the next end step. Not so great. The -X, of course, deal X damage to each creature, so we can actually knock out some smaller creatures with this if we so need to. Deretti, Scrap Savant. I still run Deretti as a commander, for the record, but Deretti in the 99 here makes perfect sense. The +2, discard up to 2 cards to draw that many cards. Yep, perfect fit, and we have just enough artifacts to make the -2 worthwhile as well. And Jaya Ballard, same deal. +1, discard up to 3 cards, then draw that many cards. We could also +1 to add triple red, and we can only spend that to cast instant or sorcery spells, but that's fine. She has proven a workhorse in my Lord Windgrace deck, actually, so I love having her here. And 16 sorceries. We're doing a bit more spell slinging with this deck. So, of course, Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 cards, draw 3. Chandra's Ignition. Again, once Brallin is made swole, Chandra's Ignition and deal a bunch of damage to each of our opponents equal to his power. Devil's Play, just their X damage red spell that we can flash back for triple red and X. Faithless Looting, of course, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and flashes back from the graveyard. Fiery Confluence, just to have some extra removal around. So for 4 mana, we can choose 3 modes, and we can choose as many of the same or as many different modes as we like. So deal 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. I like the flexibility here for 4 mana. Gravatic Punch, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target player. So if somebody's getting low, we've got our Brallin kind of swole. Knock him out with the Gravatic Punch, and it has Jumpstart, so we can bring it back. We can cast it a second time by discarding a card. Hour of Devastation. Brallin will likely be larger than 5 toughness, so this is a great board wipe for us. Insult to Injury coming from Amonkhet as well. The insult side, if you cast it from your hand, damage cannot be prevented this turn, and if a source you control would deal damage, it's doubled. So, great card coming from the hand. What about from the graveyard? Injury, the Aftermath side. Deal 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. So, Injury, not so strong, but it gives us some flexibility. Mana Geyser. Yes, it's a one-shot, but hey, add 1 red to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponent's control, so even if you're getting 8, 10, 12, 15, 18 mana, you get insane amounts of mana from this card. Molten Psyche, each player shuffles cards from their hands into their library, then draws that many cards. And we have enough artifacts that the Metalcraft could come into play. If you control 3 or more artifacts, deal damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards that player has drawn. So there you go. So Molten Psyche, great card. Reforge, it's a 5 mana wheel effect, but if we get it for the miracle, it's only 2. More often than not, we'll be paying the full 5. It'll just likely happen that way. But that's why it's a miracle when you can draw it and cast it for 2. Shattered Perception. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. So that's only for you, not for the rest of the board. And it also has Flashback. I think that's the coolest feature of this card. Yes, it's a 6 mana Flashback. It's pretty pricey, but it's a nice back pocket option. Sweltering Suns deal 3 damage to each creature, or we can cycle away for 3 if we don't need to do that. Tormenting Voice, another way to discard a card and draw 2. And of course, Wheel of Fortune, the price of this skyrocketed because of Brallin and Shabraz. And Wild Guess. Double red, discard a card, draw 2. And that gives us Brallin. It's a very, very straightforward deck. Yes, we miss out on a lot of blues wheel effects. We miss out on a lot of the white damage redirects and ways to defend ourselves. But in exchange, we get a very aggressive, very straightforward build in mono red. One that I think will prove very effective. When I was looking this up on EDH Rec, there's only 6 people who have posted decks that are running Brallin solo. So let's see if we can bump up those numbers a little bit, shall we? And on that, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. More deck decks will be slow coming. Big changes afoot here in Kelowna. Nothing official yet. I'll know more in about a month's time. But yeah, don't be surprised if there's a new look to the room in a month, 2 months, 3 months. But we don't know yet. Anyways, on that, I am going to sign off. Keep building up some brews if I can, and we'll see you all next time.